Hi, my name is Greg and welcome to chapter 14 of my 1949 P3 Rover restoration story. Now in this chapter it's really a continuation of some of the material that I covered in chapter 13. In this chapter I'm going to cover the welding assembly of parts for my rear suspension tube of the car that I've been remanufacturing. I'll also cover the manufacture of some of the peripheral parts that are part of this rear suspension tube assembly. Again, there'll be a bit more of an emphasis than usual on the actual workshop work and machining parts and that sort of stuff. I hope you find that interesting. I'll be keen to get any feedback around that. I guess in a lot of the previous chapters I haven't had as much emphasis on the actual workshop work. So anyway, without any further ado, I'll get on with the show now, and I'll probably see you at the end of the chapter. Okay, bye.
Now, as shown in the last chapter, chapter 13, here's a diagram from the Rover Sports Register parts manual, which shows this part that I'm remanufacturing. Showing this photo of the spring bar off of my P3, so you can see just why I had to remanufacture it. I'll show a few photos of the finished job here just so you can see what I'm working towards. After this shot I've got some footage of the welding and fabrication work. Okay, let's get ready. Glasses on, cup of tea, gloves on, helmet on, welder ready, and away we go. Slight change of plan. I thought it might be helpful just to show how I set this job up for welding first. Go through how I set it up for welding. So I had my large end plate, small end plate. I had the bosses welded on and threaded. And then I made some spaces. I made a spacer like so, and then two spaces like so. These help me to get the two plates the right distance from each other, and also to keep everything parallel. And the fact that everything was assembled actually on the tube that it was to be welded to sort of helped with the alignment as well. I hope that kind of explains it. Well, here's the end result after all that welding. I'm pretty happy with that. I could do with just a bit of tidying up. I've probably gone a bit heavier on the welds than what the original was, and a bit more extensive as well. And in a lot of cases on the original, there'd just be a sort of a runner weld rather than sort of welding right away around. So I've been a bit more, I guess, thorough with it. I've probably got a bit carried away here. I'll probably grind some of that back just to tidy it up a bit. But overall I'm happy with it. There is one problem I'm not sure you're going to be able to see too well. And it was pretty much an unavoidable problem really. So as I've welded along here, it's caused some distortion. So this is actually bent in slightly. That was always going to happen. So basically you're applying a whole lot of heat on this side, the metal expands and then causes it to bend. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to clamp this firmly in the vise, heat it up with a blowtorch, and then sort of bend it back straight. It's actually not too bad, but I can get it better, so that's what I'll do.
I've circled and read just a couple of simple U-brackets that I made. These are copies of what was on the original bar. I made just a very simple form tool to wrap the steel around to form these brackets. This is one of two brackets that I salvaged from the original assembly. As you can see, there's some wear grooves in it, so that's what I'm going to cover. I've highlighted a couple of the wear areas here. Now these brackets fasten the whole welded assembly to the car. The next job was to build up some of the wear areas with weld as shown in this photo. And then the next job was to grind all the welded areas flat again so it looked as good as new. The next part of the job I'm going to cover is some work that I did to these shackle assemblies. Now they ended up being quite a bit of work in these shackle assemblies. If you look carefully at the photo, you can see an adjustment bolt that goes through. That was quite corroded, so I made new versions of those. Also the part that bolt goes through, which is like a spacer come retainer, I made new parts there. And also part of this assembly, there's a silent block bushing in there, which I bought some, but they didn't fit very well, so I ended up making new parts there. And lastly, they shackle pins, or special bolts as I'd refer to them. I bought a couple, but then I had to make a couple too to get the job finished. Now for this spacer comes sort of bolt retainer part. I started off by just turning this piece that you see here out of bright mild steel, and now I'm going to cover the next parts of the operation, which cover sort of drilling a hole through the centre of it and milling a flat section in it.
First trick is I want to find the centre longitudinally on this piece of work, so that's what I'm going to do now. So I'm using a little edge finder. Let's make sure these are unlocked. We'll wind it up a bit. I'll go and find my reading glasses. Oh, that's better, I might even be able to see it now.
Got the machine running at about 1100 RPM now, so what I'm doing here is I'm just very slowly moving the workpiece towards the edge finder.
Now when I watch that edge finder, when it starts to run eccentrically, as it is now, call that 0. Now when I go to the other side, make sure that's running out. Okay, now I'm going to do the same. Bring it in slowly. The regular will start to sort of run not eccentrically. Now as soon as it starts to run eccentrically again, that's the point I'm looking for. Okay, there. So I'll press the second Y-axis button and then press half. When I wind it into that point, that'll be the centre point. So we'll need to hold that like that. Undo the drawbar. Give it a bit of a tap. Already got a milling cutter mounted in this that I used on the first one of these parts. So tighten up the drawbar, which draws the collar holder up on a taper and centres it. Okay, that's nice and tight. Now I can wind this to that longitudinal centre point. Pretty good. What I do next is I'm going to bring up the table in height. And I'm going to lock the quill, so I'm not
doing a drilling operation now. I'm going to do a milling operation. Let's get me close-ish. I'll go a bit more close-ish. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to wind this up quite slowly until the cutter just touches the workpiece. I know that I want to have the depth of cut 0.156 of an inch to match the original part. So what I do, once it touches, I'll convert 0.156 of an inch to metric, because all the graduations on my machine are in metric. And then I'll work out how many divisions that is on here, and then wind it up. I'll probably do it in the depth of cut in 2 or 3 cuts, with the last cut being quite a light cut, just to get a good finish. Just winding the table up very slowly now until the cutter just touches. I'll put a little bit of cutting lubricant on just to help the cutter out a little bit. Just to explain, I'm using a 2-flute cutter for this, which is essentially a slot milling operation rather than a 4. The 2-flute, which I think I often refer to as actually slot cutters, are better for this sort of operation, because you've only got the 2 flutes. You've got a much better chance of the steel tips being cleared out of the way and not getting in the way of your work. So they tend to work better for slot cutting. Next thing I've got to do is mill it to width. I've calculated that I've got to move 50 thou each side to get the width that I want, so that's what I'll do next. Now I'm going to go 50 thousandths of an inch in the other direction. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. I mean, just as a rough way of checking, the width of the slot looks the same as the part that I'm trying to reproduce. So the next trick will be to drill this hole through the centre. So I'll have to take the milling cutter out and back with a drill truck. I'll have to work out the centre in this direction. I already know the centre in that direction. I guess the hole basically goes in the centre. I've got the drill in now. I'm happy that it's in the centre, so we'll give it a go. I'm using a centre drill just as a way of starting the hole in the right place accurately. So I'll go in with this drill just to start the hole, and this drill will be the finished size. Next thing I have to do is I'm going to have to take my parallel bar out. I mean, I'll put that in there so that I can be sure the piece of work was lying flat. So I'm going to have to tap that out now. Otherwise I'll end up drilling into it, which wouldn't be good for the parallel bar or the drill, because the parallel bar is hardened. So. Go, that's out. Okay, it's through. To be honest, I can't even recall what size that is, but I just basically tried imperial size drills into the hole on the original part until I found a drill that was the right size. This stuff away with something other than my bare hands, so. I mean, the edges will be quite sharp and a bit nasty. So that should be good. I'll just take it to the bench now and just run a file over the edges, get rid of the burrs, and I'll deburr the edges of the hole as well, and then it's finished. This photo shows part of the spring shackle assembly, and as you can see on this part, there's a new bushing fitted in the middle of it with some red rubber in there. I made that part, so in this next section I'm going to cover how I made these so-called silent block bushings and why.
Now I've got the three component parts of the silent block bushing here. So there's a outer casing, and then the next layer is this sort of rubber bushing. This is the original, so you can see that's not in very good shape at all. And then there's an inner bushing, steel bushing. So I'm going to cover, at least to some extent, how I made these parts.
I'm going to cover now how I turn up the rubber section of the bushing assembly.
Perhaps the most challenging part to make was the rubber bushing in the centre. So to help me with that, I turned up from aluminium this bar, which is the same diameter as the inner bushing, and then I got myself some machine grade polyurethane. I drilled that out to a diameter that was a firm fit on that diameter, and slid that over this bar. What that gave me is, I can't demonstrate it all that well here, but it overcame one of the sort of primary problems that I had in the rubber being rubber. When you introduced a cutting tool to it, it tended to bend. So by having it on this sort of solid bar, it did overcome that problem, at least to some extent.
Very happy with how these bushings turned out. That was a bit of a challenge, especially the rubber turning part. I will give a brief description of the cutting tool that I used to turn the rubber.
I had to experiment a bit, but I used a high-speed cutting tool. This is the one I used to cut the polyurethane rubber. I found that it worked best to have a sort of reasonable nose radius on it, and then I had to go to a fair bit of effort to really hone the cutting edges so it was really super sharp, and I found that worked quite well.
I will finish off with a few final assembly shots now. pretty much fully assembled now, complete with a couple of bought shackle pins and a couple of homemade ones.
Well, hi again. With this I'll wrap up chapter 14 of my 1949 P3 Rover restoration story. I hope you found it interesting. This was my first try using a different editing package for my video, so I was experimenting with it a bit, so hopefully it went okay. It was a bit of a learning curve, but hopefully I can do a neater job on the next video. I've still got a few more chapters to go. I'd say I've got some old footage that I've shot before, some various bits of work that I've done, so I'll be putting some of that together. The car, as an overall project, is getting pretty close to the paint shop now and getting a new coat of paint. I've got a little trial run that was done here. Hopefully you can see that okay on the video. So this is really a replica of the original colour, obviously in modern paint. So hopefully I'll have some photos to show that in the not too distant future. Hoping to have the whole project finished certainly before the end of this year. So anyway, stay tuned and I'll see you at the next chapter. Bye.